at that time between the bankers and the government. And it was burdening people with massive new bonds for railroads, for internal improvements, things that were not constitutionally founded. And in Iowa, heading into the war without a declaration by the state legislature, Governor Kirkwood sent a whole bunch of people off to war and said, we're going to make the people pay for it. They organized a statewide bond vote, and the Copperheads organized across the state of Iowa and defeated the bond. So a Copperhead, as part of a political history, goes back to people who believe in honest money, fixed to an honest standard, and tries to fight for the middle class across the country. So whatever they implied about the Copperheads, that's what my firm is named after. Again, just to review what Larry said, we're going to ask you to indulge us and bite back your questions. If you hear something you think is inconsistent or not proper, you'll get your time. We'd like to make our case first and then open it up for a real town hall format. I will say this, and I've seen this abused across the Midwest. CARE will not be holding a Delphi type meeting tonight. Kind of a goofy word, and a lot of people don't know what it is, but the Delphi technique developed by the Rand Corporation in the 1950s is taught to school administrators across the country. And it's a way, they say it's a way to bring consensus. What it really is, if you study its tactics and techniques, it's a way to manipulate the public with crowd control techniques, which school administrators are trained in, and to, in the end, have the audience all believe that they are on board with, to get them to be on board with the predetermined outcomes. With the Delphi technique, it is imperative for the acceptance of a new school agenda that ordinary people assume ownership of the preset outcomes. If people can be manipulated through large group peer pressure and small group deception to believe an idea is theirs, they'll support it. If they believe an idea is being forced upon them, they'll resist. What do I mean by small group deception? One of the tactics trained in Delphi is to get people to break off in small groups, 8 or 10 in a group, and sit down and write down the pros and cons of an issue, write a list of these things out, and then turn them into the local facilitator at their table. Their issues get passed up to a larger facilitator, and when the final report comes out, I had a lawyer, a senior lawyer in a community in eastern Iowa, said, until you explained it to us, I didn't know what happened to us. A bunch of us put down all kinds of more prudent responses we could do for the school, and none of them showed up in the report. It's because the facilitators who consolidate all those pros and cons in your little small group meeting, they'll often pick through the ones that they want and then represent to the board or the task force that this, in fact, is what the consensus of the people wanted. And you'll never know. Who else in your group may have written down very similar reasons that you had that opposed it. They're trained in it. I have no idea if the school district here in Ord is doing this. I'm not accusing them at all, but I do know it happened in Ponca, Nebraska. I do know it happened in Ventura, Iowa. I do know it happened in North Cedar, Iowa, and it's happening all across the country. They call it consensus. It's a sophisticated Rand Corporation developed psychological manipulation of crowds using peer pressure and other tactics to get people to agree to their predetermined outcomes. CARE will not tonight be a part of that. We're going to hold a complete town hall format, and we'll present and defend our position as best we can. We see you, the CARE committee sees you all, as kind of a large jury, and we're the prosecuting attorneys prosecuting our case. In the end, we're going to make the best case we can, answer all your questions. If in fact there may be a point or two that you have that's valid, you may be have a better answer than we do. But in the end, we think the compendium, the totality of all of our arguments and positions, that in the end you'll come to vote when the day comes and your ballot arrives to agree and vote against. So we're going to honor the old historic town hall process. And I will say that what I've heard from the committee members, that the proponents of committees that I've heard about, the reports I've heard, is that when it comes to Q&A and so forth, that you folks have been fair in that process. Now they're not sure you answer the questions what the way they would like, but at least that the format has been fair. Again, my credentials. Yes, you've all Googled me. I'm a homeschool dad, and I want that to represent one thing, that I feel very strongly about children getting a good education. And that's it. Does it have anything to do with this campaign? Nothing at all. My personal convictions and beliefs and so forth have no bearing whatsoever. Our agreement with my clients is I'll do research and do some preliminary drafting. They edit, approve, everything. And so you'll see nothing about homeschooling and the rest of that. That's my personal views. It's got nothing to do with CARE Committee's campaign. I would like to tip my hat, if possible, to a professional colleague. Is Brian Mickelson here tonight? Brian at all? Brian is the Nebraska State Education Association's UNISERV Director for Political Field Operations. He helped directly in the Carney campaign when they passed a $45 million bond issue. And as we've seen, I'm sure you've heard, the Nebraska State Education Association has put money into the proponent side here in Ord, and they boasted on their website how they come into small communities with cash and political consulting, phone banking, yard signs, the works. So if Brian's here, it'd be good just to give him a professional tip of courtesy, and maybe we can meet later and exchange war stories or something, but we're kind of in the same business. He's on the other side working to pass these. I work with the taxpayers to help oppose them. So if you're here, Brian, stop in and visit afterwards. I'd like to at this time, and if you'll humor me a bit, you need to see the bigger picture that's going on outside of your community that brings pressure to bear on school administrators and school boards across the country. The story is the same wherever I go. And that big picture is debt. As I said, I'm a former banker. I used to be a bank stock acquisition consultant. I used to do failed bank transactions back in the 80s. I saw the misery and the suffering of the last go-round of a banking crisis, and I'm here to say tonight that it's much bigger than anything we experienced back in the 80s, that which we're facing. Let me give you just, I'm going to narrow this down fairly quickly to Ord, but take the big picture from the outside and let's bring it down. The debt loads are so out of control around the world that just a couple days ago, I think it's George Osborne is the incoming finance minister for the Conservative Party in England. And he announced to the media and to the financial news there that England is sinking in a sea of debt. Sinking. That was a conservative politician, conservative newspaper, the London Telegraph. A couple of days ago, Rolling Stone out of California, one of the biggest liberal publications in America, came out with a 13-page story on the fraudulent securities industry in this country and what it's doing to the middle class. Bonds, debts, stocks, shortings, derivatives, naked shorts, the whole mess. Here's their conclusion. That was a conservative politician. Here's a liberal publication. The nation's largest financial players are able to write the rules for their own businesses and brazenly steal billions under the noses of regulators, and nothing is done about it. A thing so fundamental to civilized society as the integrity of a stock or a mortgage or even a U.S. Treasury bond, in your case municipal bonds, can no longer be protected, not even in a crisis. And a crime as vulgar and as conspicuous as counterfeiting can take place on a systemic level for years without being stopped. What 10 years ago was a cheap stock fraud scheme for second-rate grifters has become a profit center for Wall Street. Our burglar class now rules the national economy, and no one is trying to stop them. That's the liberal side. A couple days ago, the Goldwater Institute put out a piece out of Arizona. Allstate Insurance Company is suing Prescott Valley, Arizona for misrepresenting and overhyping the projections on a major bond in their community that turned out to be a disaster. The article concludes and says, similar allegations of fraud can be expected to